We saved them tables right there at the front, and numerous family members came up to me and hugged me and were crying and thanked me. They hadn't even read the book yet. They just were happy that somebody cared enough to put in the work to write a book, to research the book, and to get it published.
Absolutely. And you did it properly. You were vague enough that, you'd have to really search to figure out who exactly he married and, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
You were vague enough that it's not too terribly easy to just go on Facebook and figure out who these people are, which I think is the right way to do it. You don't have to use everyone's full names and give everyone's full birth dates all the time. Sometimes it can just be the victim's son for the entirety of the project. So that's really great. I've only interviewed one juvenile killer who was freed, but I mostly speak with the murder victims' family members. And they always just tell me that, there's the two categories. Some don't want to relive these things, but some start foundations and have a day, named after their slain family member or their child. And then they do things to keep their child out there, their child's memory out there in the public. So those are the ones that I approach, They clearly want to have their child's memory kept alive. And that's what they're always most thankful about, is that, like you said, somebody cared enough to even take the time out of their life to talk about their loved one,
Yeah. There was not a whole lot of people who went to therapy in the 80s. And one of the things I realized is that when it came to a lot of the key people in this, basically nobody went to therapy. They didn't talk about it amongst themselves. They didn't talk about it within the family. They didn't go get any professional help. There was multiple times that I went into an interview, and I remember, you feel that nervousness in your heart. I'm about to ask somebody some uncomfortable question.
Right. Are they going to cry?
Yeah. Are they going to be mad at me? Are they going to be defensive? Are they going to question my motivation? And multiple times at the end of interviews, I would thank somebody profusely for their time and for their candor. And the response back to me was, "Thank you for asking." And it made me realize that in some ways I started to become a little bit of a therapist for people, because I could tell that no one really asked them. They didn't really talk about it. And it's remarkable how often when someone has gone that long, and I know that Tina's brother Drew said this, he went years and years without talking to anybody. And then one day he just said to his friends, "Hey, it's okay. You can talk to me. You can ask me anything you want about my sister." And so they started to ask him questions, and he said what a difference it made just that one night to talk to his closest friends about what happened, and how much easier it then became after keeping it all inside.
Well, frankly, for any of the males that were involved, it wasn't manly to seek out any kind of help for emotional issues. And for everyone, it was just working times. All you were trying to do is keep your family afloat in these years. You didn't really have time to dwell, which doesn't really make for healing properly. And I'm sure a lot of people have PTSD based on this event, or did, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And I think because they didn't find the killer until 30 years, I think it made it harder for people to really process and kind of talk through their feelings when they just don't know, who did it? Why'd they do it? Who is it? Is that person still out there? Was that a person who just happened to be roaming through town? There were just a lot of unknowns about it.
Well, and another thing about the mid 80s is especially in California, it was just prime time for serial killers and serial rapists and burglars. And it was just happening all over the state. So you probably get a little bit immune to it, Yeah. And it probably wasn't just the thought. It's just like they're out there, until they get caught, they're just out there.
Yeah, and it's terrible that you do get immune to it, but yeah, you're right. There was unfortunately there was a lot of cases in the 80s, and then every time that somebody does get caught, then it's only natural that every police department is now going to look into that person to see, did that person commit this murder that we've been trying to solve in our community or in that community or in that community. And so you keep kind of hoping, that, okay, this horrible human being got caught. Okay, can we tie him to these other things? No, he didn't. Dang it. Now here we go, back to the drawing board once again about who might have done it.
Right. And then so while you're going back to the drawing board over here, other people are, crimes continue to happen. Other crimes don't stop so that you can investigate what's already happened, So it's just one of those things you also have to consider when you think about wanting to blame the Pleasanton Police Department for doing a bad job. You chalk it up to inexperience. This was even their first child killed.
Yeah, it was the first child that had been killed in a long time. I forget the exact details.
Oh, yeah, like maybe 3 decades or something like that.
I can tell you that the police chief at the time, he had 2 daughters who were going to the same high school, and the lead detective had a daughter who was a teenager. This was personal to them. This was very personal. It's not like they didn't care. If anything, they cared too much. They worked constantly on this. They knew that how easily this could have been their own daughter. And for both of them, I talked with both of them, and it's basically like their biggest regret before they both retired was that they were not able to solve the case themselves. But of course, they were extremely relieved when the DNA evidence finally talked years later, and they were able to know that this person was finally arrested after all this time. So, I think that they did the best that they could. They made a few mistakes that they probably wish they could have back, but they were also up against a lack of technology that we take for granted now. And just the lack of evidence.
Especially if you didn't live in those times. You have no idea what we were up against. Just trying to have a good time.
Yeah.
But that's good to know. And it's also great that given the fact that it was 27 years, that they were both still alive. So to at least get to see the DNA work. And, honestly, I don't really know. They didn't have the evidence.
Right.
So even if they didn't, in hindsight, you want to know why they didn't spend more time on him. But it's like they had so many students and so many, the other 4 disappearances and murders that were going on like around the time as well. So there's a lot of other things going on. And in hindsight, it's easy to say, why didn't they he said he did it. Why didn't they just arrest him? But there was a lot of other things going on as well and other leads that they had to pursue. And he was a knuckleheaded kid. Honestly, who's going to even believe him unless he really got down to it and said, I'm serious. This is what I did and how and why. That would be a different situation, but it didn't come across that that's how he portrayed it.
Yeah, one of the things I thought that was really cool is that the officer who arrested Steve Carlson in 2011, he was a police wrangler at the time, which is kind of a fancy way of saying that he was a police intern, and he's basically been a police officer his entire life. And when they made the arrest, he went to the retired police chief's house and told him in person, we finally got him. And this way, the retired police chief would know in advance before the reporters started a call, but professional courtesy, hey, we finally got this guy, and was able to give him the news in person, was able to give the news in person to Tina's mother. So I thought those things were pretty special.
It is. It really is. It's so tragic what ended up happening to Tina's mother, but at least she did get to live long enough to see the man who killed her daughter arrested,
Yeah, man, when it comes to Tina's mom, Shirley, I got a lot of emotions about her. I remember thinking to myself that I'm not going to write this book unless I have the family's permission. And right. So just so you and your audience knows, legally, I don't need their permission. This was in the public domain enough that I don't need the permission of the family. From a legal standpoint, from a personal and kind of ethical standpoint, I was not going to do it if they didn't approve. I did not want, plus I just knew that it would just be really hard to do so. So I remember thinking, well, how do I even approach Tina's mom? Like, where do you start? Like, I don't know her. Do I knock on the door? Do I call her out of the blue? Can I find her number? So I wrote her an old-fashioned letter. I typed up a letter. I printed it out. I put a stamp on an envelope. I sent it in the mail. It got there about 3 days later, 4 days later. She called me instantly as soon as she got finished reading it. And she thought that it was great. And I told her that I was going to be in Pleasanton in a few weeks and I'd love to come by to meet her in person just so that she can know more about me and make sure that she understood who I was. And I didn't want to interview her that first day. I just wanted her to know who I was and just kind of pick her brain a little bit. And, Tina's mom still lived at the same house that she lived in at the time. So, I'll be honest, there's multiple times where, the hairs on my arm are kind of standing up as I'm walking inside Shirley's house.
Tina's house.
Yeah. It was interesting. Shirley called me numerous times and Shirley was already dealing with some mental health issues. And Shirley would call me all the time out of the blue, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes because she had somebody else who she thought that I could interview. Sometimes she wanted to know if I was hearing anything. And she was not doing well mentally, but she did tell me numerous times, I know in my heart they got the right guy. I know they got him. And she kept telling me, I'm going to be at the trial. I'm going to be at the trial. I know that I'm not good enough right now, but I'm going to will my body to be ready for the trial. And then the day that the trial was originally expected to start, it had already been pushed back, but it was still the day that Shirley had circled on her calendar. And she tragically died of a heart attack that day. So she never got to hear the jury say guilty. But again, in her heart, she felt like that they had gotten the right guy.
Yeah, because the DNA evidence, it was so foolproof. The test came back so conclusive. Mm-hmm. I'm glad she was able to feel 100% comfortable that those were the right results. So as far as those other cases that were going on at the same time, when I covered the episode last week, I did not spend very much time at all going into any of those. I just kind of mentioned it offhand, but I did want to find out. I think there was one case that remained unsolved when the book was published.
Yeah, there's still one case, and that's still. And that's a case of a girl by the name of Kelly Poppleton. That was the one that was closest in age to Tina, closest in proximity to Tina, because basically where Tina was murdered, it was next to this creek. And if you continue on that creek for, 5 miles, 8 miles, 10 miles is where Kelly's body was found. Unfortunately, we're probably never going to know about Kelly because the family decided to have the body cremated. And so they don't have any DNA of Kelly to be able to compare that to anybody. So while you never say never, it is pretty doubtful that we're actually ever going to find out who did that unless it's somebody who is already in prison and then confesses that they were the ones who did it and provides some type of evidence that kind of shows, that proves that they did it, as opposed to them just doing it because they just want to try and look like a bigger badass in prison. Right. Yeah. It's such a shame. There's so many of those cases just everywhere, and it's crazy. We've been seeing a whole bunch of cases be solved with DNA lately, but like genealogical DNA. So this is a little bit more old school, but it's just still crazy every time when you hear that a 20 or 25-year-old case has gotten solved using DNA. It's crazy to me. It's like Steve Carlson, he was already locked up when they started to really put their sights on him. But these other guys just walking around living their lives, it's just crazy to think about. Yeah, that. I also think it's just as crazy the number of people who were arrested and they were clearly innocent. A case of mistaken identity, a case of police being overzealous and trying to find somebody, and then DNA proving that someone who's been locked up has been innocent this whole time. The way that DNA has evolved, it's one of the most amazing things over the last 20, 30 years of the number of people who have been released from prison, who were falsely arrested, falsely convicted, and the number of people who were able to avoid the police initially, and then eventually justice came and they were able to get them. Right. We talk about the death penalty a lot and the cases surrounding
the death penalty getting abolished with juveniles. And so people always want to know what I think about the death penalty. And I just tell them it's really hard to say that with the amount of, I had a case where 13 people, I think, came